Obi-Wan Kenobi has gained the ultimate high ground as we convert him to pilot a BARC Speeder. Welcome to Zorba Gaming, my name's Lachlan Linton Keane, and today we are converting Obi-Wan Kenobi to pilot a speeder bike. This is a conversion that I'm working on for our upcoming second installment of our Battle for Geonosis campaign. We have an epic scenario where Obi is flying on with a bunch of barks at his flanks, and he's going to dish the pain and try and assassinate Count Dooku. Should be pretty excellent, but of course, we first up need ourselves an Obi-Wan riding a BARC Speeder. I've already got a fully assembled and painted BARC Speeder here. If you guys are keen to see that process, I'll link the painting tutorial up above, and I've also got all of the clone pilots and an Obi-Wan Kenobi from the Clone Wars box set. So first things first, we're going to gather together all the components we need for the conversion. I'm not going to be using the sidecar in this video, but you could of course build that as per normal and attach that to your Obi-Wan, but I'm going to have Obi-Wan flying in solo on a bike all on his own, just like he does in the Clone Wars TV series, so we can get rid of all of the sidecar elements, including the pilots. We're just going to be building with pieces from the main BARC pilot and Obi-Wan himself. We're just going to be using his upper torso and his saber arm and of course his head. We don't need his left hand with the Your Move fingers or his legs. Now the BARC pilot comes in a large piece that is his legs and torso, and then he's got his head and his left and right arms, which are already connected to the handlebars of the speeder bike. We obviously don't need his helmet, and we also don't need his torso. So what we're going to do is slice this model in half and remove those legs so that we can attach them to the base of our Obi-Wan torso. The wonderful thing about this conversion is it's super easy. Because we have a Jedi who has a lovely flowing robe going down over his legs, we can make this cut pretty messy. It doesn't even have to be clean because all of this joint is going to be hidden by the folds of the cloak. So the first thing we're going to do is take our scalpel and separate the lower half of the clone pilot, and I'm going to make my incision underneath his utility belt. And that way it's going to sit perfectly, it's going to line up nicely with Obi-Wan, who of course has a really obvious belt as well. Now this Obi-Wan torso piece isn't going to jam on there neatly, so we're going to need to remove all of this plastic cloak. I just brought in some clippers and kind of clipped away the vast bulk of it and then chiseled away some with my scalpel, making sure not to damage any of the components on the belt so that all of those utility belt elements are intact. Now you'll see that's obviously not going to sit cleanly, so then what we're going to do is pin this in place. I'm going to insert my pin vise and then get a bit of a brass rod, or in my case paper clip, because COVID I don't have any brass rod, and I'm going to insert that into the base of Obi-Wan's torso. That gives me a pinning rod, which is going to sort of act as the spine of this model, and then that will allow me to drill another hole in the base of the clone pilot and then attach those in the perfect spacing so that I've got the right amount of distance between Obi-Wan's shoulders and his hips, so that even though the cut wasn't perfect and the pieces don't go together perfectly, we can get the right separation to have a realistic looking spine. Once you've got the corresponding hole drilled in the BARC pilot legs, I'm going to dry fit this together and pop it onto the BARC so that I can make sure the angle I want Obi-Wan to be is going to fit nicely on the seat, and then bring in some super glue and glue the rest of that rod together so that we have one solid Obi-Wan piece, albeit with a massive hole through his middle. But of course we need to fill that gap and complete his cloak. If you're not familiar with green stuff, it's a two-part putty, blue and yellow, that you mix together. It goes green, it's super sticky. It's got a working time of about an hour and a half and then a cure time of sort of 4 to 5 hours, but you usually want to wait about 24 hours before you paint it for it to go fully hard and lock in all of your sculpting work. Now, a lot of people get really intimidated by green stuff and sculpting in general, and projects like this are a fantastic way to start. This is a really simple sculpt, and you can do it with some really easy techniques and get a fantastic looking result. So first up, we're going to mix up that putty and just jam it into that join. Get some nice putty all around, flowing down from underneath the belt and hiding the join. Feel free to jam it into the gap as well. That's going to give the model a little bit of extra strength in case you drop him. You don't want this whole conversion falling apart. So it's all locked together, and just mix up more and more little chunks and gently apply them. Now when you're working with green stuff, I just use my scalpel as my sculpting tool, and the trick is to make sure that you have a wet blade. So dip your scalpel into a bit of water and then you can push the putty around. Once you've got putty all the way around that model, fit him, do a bit of a dry fit on that BARC Speeder, and that way you can make sure that you're sculpting the green stuff in the right areas so that the cloth isn't going to be majorly obscuring how he sits down on the seat, and then we can start to bulk bulk out these cloth layers. Now don't worry about folds or shape, we just want to get the material down. So the first kind of big shape or form that we want to do is, if you look at Obi-Wan's robes, it has like a partition that spreads at the groin and then another central piece that comes down. So separate those two halves of the cloth that wrap around behind him and then go over the top of each thigh. Make sure you've bulked out all of that material. You've got a kind of a rough shape of what it's going to look like, and then just grab a separate piece of green stuff and we're going to apply that over the top to be the sash that hangs down through the middle. You can do a quick dry fit again here once this is bulked out as well, so that you can make sure those pieces that you have got over those thighs are sitting nicely against the front of the BARC and the console. Then I'm just going to add this extra piece down over the top, and you can see keeping it defined and adding that extra definition really creates the obvious sense that that's the sash flowing over the top. And if you need to lengthen it or thin it, just drag your scalpel down across it and grip it and get it nice and thin and flat so that it's not a ridiculously thick piece of material, which is pretty unrealistic, but it's obviously there and it looks quite nice. Now, of course, the other big thing that's going to make this really read is motion. This is a BARC speeder. He's hooning through the Geonosian desert, and we're going to have wind streaking past him. So now what we're going to do is start to add the cloth folds and give a dynamic element to the sculpt by just bringing in our scalpel, working up underneath these layers and pushing them back as if they're blowing by the wind. I'm probably not doing this enough to be realistic, but the cloth would probably be flying back past him and getting caught in the engines if we're being realistic. But we don't want it to look that ridiculous, so I'm hinting at the dynamic element of the wind, but I'm not bothering to kind of really go over the top. So up next, we're going to start working on Obi-Wan's arms, and we're going to grab the clone BARC pilot left arm, which of course has the handlebar piece, and we'll slot that into the BARC, and you can see obviously it contains all of the shoulder, so we need to find a way to join this component with our Obi-Wan torso. So I'm not going to modify the torso in any way. What we're going to do is grab our scalpel and cut this clone pilot arm off at the elbow, and then I'm going to trim that down so that the only component left of the clone pilot arm is the elbow piece armor plate. There's none of the upper arm section, the bicep, where he has some cloth that joins before the shoulder plate, because what we're going to do is re-sculpt that with some more green stuff, and once again, we're going to join these components together using a bit of brass rod. It's as if we're putting the arm bone in between the shoulder and the elbow so that we can get the optimum spacing, we can make sure it meshes nicely, and then we can just pad that out with a little bit of green stuff because it's all just cloth in between the armor panels, and it's super easy to do, and it's going to make your arm look absolutely sweet. So now that that is all pinned together, it looks pretty fantastic. I've got my Obi-Wan torso pose on a little bit of a lean, so his left arm, the one we've just sculpted, is coming forward a little bit more than the BARC pilot's position, but luckily there's a nice bit of flex and strength in that handlebar piece, so it kind of just looks like he's revving it forward, and it will look totally fine once you put the other handlebar in as well. So our next detail is of course our right arm, our saber-wielding arm. Now when we take this piece and normally it locks into that Obi-Wan arm, he's doing the classic your move pose. Now if you wanted to, you could certainly leave it like this, but I wanted something a little more different and really quite dynamic. I wanted Obi-Wan to be rearing his saber in the air as if he was calling all the BARCs behind him to launch forward, or he's ready to deflect a saber bolt. So I'm going to reposition this arm from the traditional pose. The first thing I want to do is grab my scalpel and clip off that little plastic peg that locks in with the tongue and groove of the Obi-Wan right shoulder, and then we're just going to do the exact same technique. I'm going to drill into Obi-Wan's shoulder with my pin vise, mount a piece of steel rod in there or paper clip, and then put a corresponding hole in Obi-Wan's elbow, and then glue those together and bring in some green stuff. And this is a really simple technique. It's going to allow you kind of like full articulation. You can have the saber blade coming down in any shape you want really because of the way this part is manufactured. So it's a really easy repose that's going to give you a nice unique looking Obi-Wan. So with that saber arm complete, we just slide in Obi-Wan's head, and you can see now why I really went for that torso rotation. It just looks like he's looking off into the distance at something he's flying at or engaging. So with that slight torso position, we managed to make this a really believable and readable pose. I then just added in the other handlebar, and I just clipped off the section that has the pilot's fist, and then just replaced it with a little bit of brass rod and clipped on a circular piece of plastic to complete that handlebar. Nice and simple, and there we have ourselves ourselves an Obi-Wan riding BARC. It's a pretty simple conversion, guys. It's not that much work, and it's such a cool model. I'm really happy with how it's turned out. I then primed it all white and gave it a paint job in the exact same manner as I painted my foot Obi-Wan. I'll link the painting guide for that up above. And now he is ready to take the fight to the Clankers and lead his squad of BARCs to assassinate Count Dooku on Geonosis. Now, I've also included in the description some rules for fielding this unit in your games at home. I didn't create these. Some incredible people over at the Star Wars Legion Homebrew Discord, the members Lite and especially Aurora, did some incredible work to put together a fantastic unit profile that upgrades a BARC Speeder as well as some specialized command cards. So all that's in the description, and all of it will also be included in our campaign materials in the upcoming second installment. So there we go, guys, a short one but a sweet one, and hopefully you guys are all inspired to convert up an Obi-Wan Kenobi for your games at home. Obviously this is an installment in the preparation of our second Geonosis campaign, so a bit of a spoiler, Obi-Wan is going to be flying into battle, the ultimate high ground, riding in with quite a few BARC Speeders at his flanks as well. It's going to be a pretty awesome way for him to make an entrance into our narrative campaign. If you haven't seen the first installment of the Battle of Geonosis, I'll link that down in the description.
Enemies around the target zone! Heavy bombardment! Stay out of the blast range! Auto guns online! Turret locking on! Take the shot now! Fire from the sky! For the Republic!
And if you're enjoying all the Star Wars Legion content here and would like to see more like it, definitely consider supporting me on Patreon. Anyway, I will see you next week with something truly exciting as the final pieces come together for the second installment in the Battle of Geonosis. I'll see you real soon right here on Zorp. Cheers, guys.